You are watching the Double Doinkers Fantasy Football Podcast with Nick Meyer and Willie J. This week we bring you the top 15 RBs of 2026. That is the Double Doinkers predictions of the top 15 RBs of 2026. And with me, as I just said, is Willie. How are you doing, Willie? What's going on?
I'm doing good, Nick. I just got back from a family reunion on the coast. It was very nice. I got to see some family I don't get to see very often. I want to get a special shout out to some of my Bears fans family, Paul, Perry, Nick, and the gang. Got a couple new subscribers and got to talk about our podcast and got to be around some actual Bears fans that don't think I'm a bandwagoner. Because
Nice.
every Bears, not every, but most, when I do meet a Bears fan out in Oregon here, usually people are like, "Oh, that's cool," they're into the Bears because they were good last season. And in the few years that I've been wearing Bears jerseys or Bears merch, I didn't really get a whole lot of compliments or acknowledgement until last year. And then at least once or twice a week, someone would comment on something I'm wearing that's Bears related. So it was nice to be around some authentic Bears fans for once.
See, that's wonderful. I remember in 2016 when the Raiders had their one good season, it was like that for sure. Like all of a sudden, all the Raiders fans came out of the woodwork. Like, yeah, you just started liking them now. I'm like, nah, dude, I went through things. Believe me.
It's not your first one.
Yeah, exactly. If as you're listening to this, you hear my voice sounds a little different. I tested positive for COVID today, so we're on the vid. This is my flu game, and it's going to be wonderful, but also I reserve the right to blame anything out of pocket I say on that. So if you're like, whoa, dude, Bucky Irving doesn't play for the Colts, just accept it, okay?
You're seeing a vision in the future that makes more sense, not just for fantasy football, but for Bucky Irving's career and maybe the Colts regime too. So
for the fabric of the universe, really, if Bucky is in Indianapolis, he can stop some things that he couldn't stop in South Beach. Tampa Bay is not South Beach. That's the wrong one. I don't know much about Florida, so ignore me here. So this is what I'm talking about. So last week we did top 15 wide receivers. If you're interested in the wide receivers, we have a pretty lengthy breakdown on them, and that is just last week. Of course, we've done every single team, every single division in long-form content. So we've talked about pretty much every player at this point. So a lot of these aren't going to be surprises. You've heard us talk about them already. But check out some of our past episodes if you want really in-depth breakdowns.
Yeah, if you do have a day to spare, an entire day to spare actually, because it's probably close to 24 hours. If you haven't checked out our previous breakdowns, check them out. Very, very in depth. And now that we're done, whenever we finish that breakdown of the division and we start talking about rankings, that's when not just fantasy football season, but football season really starts to feel right around the corner for me. So
Yeah, same. Because it's like, okay, so we've touched on every player. If I call the divisional breakdowns like the beginner's guide too, right? Like you kind of know these players if you've listened before, but this is like if you have never or if you've never played fantasy football before, or maybe you don't know anything about the new teams or how it looks after a year off, and you're very lost and confused. Those are perfect. This is where we're just going to get into the meat and bones of who's getting picked ahead of who, and we're actually trying to look at these teams and decide what we think that their ultimate output is going to be, So speaking of that, you want to just jump into the top 15 RBs? You want to just get there?
I'm ready. I think we got some good hot takes in this one. And also Nick and I kind of broke from consensus, but also between each other. So there's some fun ones in this. I'm ready.
Mm-hmm. So with that said, because you have to add a but after a sentence like that, our first pick here isn't that far off consensus. As a matter of fact, it is consensus. So our number one overall running back for the year is Detroit Lions' Jahmyr Gibbs. So no surprises here. We've already seen what Gibbs can do. We've seen what sort of talent he has, and now he has the whole backfield to himself. So you get more opportunity for a supremely talented player who's shown that he can handle it.
Jahmyr Gibbs is really obviously it's early in CMC. We'll talk about him. His career is not over, but he really is kind of a next generation of that CMC type running back where, his value on the ground is incredible. He's one of the most explosive players in the NFL, not just as a running back, but his ability to operate as a receiver, not just in the end zone. He's not just like catching passes that are, 5 yards down the line. His ability as a receiver and his yards after catch ability are just so impressive. And, he's like a younger, supersized version of CMC. And I think, again, we'll talk about CMC, but like Gibbs really is that next generation of that fantasy cheat code.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And one other thing, I suppose, I said he has the backfield to himself. He doesn't. He has Isaiah Pacheco there, but Isaiah Pacheco, in my opinion, at this point in his career, after all these injuries, isn't close to what David Montgomery was, and he's not going to be. So I don't expect Pacheco to be like he's going to get some touchdowns because that's how this team works. But I don't think it's going to be enough to significantly impact Jahmyr Gibbs' outlook.
Yeah, Pacheco, like if you in the grand scheme of really all the players we're going to talk about on this list, Pacheco does not come close to even the top 5 of most viable RB2s to the team's RB1 that we'll be talking about. I think the fact that Montgomery is gone and that split backfield was so prolific, even with both of them on the field. We see Montgomery now; he is probably the de facto RB1 on his team, and Pacheco has not been an efficient RB1 on his previous team in at least 2 or 3 seasons. So the fact that this offense was able to sustain 2 actual legit starting running backs and have both players produce at such a high level, and now you just have the alpha in Gibbs it's hard to say there's untapped potential in Gibbs' game and his upside, but just on paper, it really feels like that's what it is.
Yeah, yep. And I would say the one thing about the Lions that you may worry about is the O-line. And the cool thing about Gibbs is that his game doesn't rely on the O-line being amazing. Like, that's where the receiving talent does come in, because if the O-line's bad, you could even see the Lions revert to some sort of like Achane like season for him, like where he's just the one who's moving the ball forward by catching a billion balls in the middle.
Mm-hmm. His ability as a receiver, really, I mean, he could absolutely lead the league in scrimmage yards, and also like, and this is no disrespect to St. Brown, but like in a nightmare scenario where they don't have their wide receiver 1 on the field, there's a world where Gibbs could be the rushing and receiving leader on the Lions. Like, that's not likely, but he does have the skill set to function as both a running back and as a receiver. And last year we saw some inefficiencies in the Lions offense, partially because of O-line, but partially because of the play calling. And when that happened, Dan Campbell, the head coach, took over play calling, and we saw a significant increased usage and efficiency for Jameson Williams, but for Gibbs as well. And now the Lions are bringing over Drew Petzing from Arizona, which, is not the most exciting hire, but I do have faith that if it's not working out, Campbell's the type of coach to actually take the reins and redirect the course of the offense if need be. So, him being there as the head coach gives me a lot of faith that we're going to see a lot of what we saw from Gibbs last year.
Yeah, and with the Cardinals, we also saw their team identity on offense. They wanted it to be Connor in the run game. Mm-hmm. It didn't really work out that way because of injuries, but that's what they wanted. And it'll be the same in Detroit. They want it to be Jahmyr Gibbs in the run game.
Yeah.
So no shock there. That's our number 1. Our number 2 is, again, we're right here with the chalk. Don't worry. We're not going to shock you here. Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons is our number 2 pick. For me, last season, he had nearly 1,500 yards rushing and over 800 yards receiving with 11 total touchdowns. And I don't think those numbers are too far-fetched. So the Falcons let Algier walk. They brought in Bijan Robinson Jr. He's not necessarily a slouch, but I also don't see him taking as much volume from Bijan. And even if he does, here's the brilliance of it. Here's the beauty of it. Kevin Stefanski is the new head coach here. We've seen Kevin Stefanski's running game history, and he can support 2 RB1s in the same system. Worst case. Best case, Bijan has a just wild workhorse season. Awesome. Super safe pick. I don't think that there's like a world in which taking him as the RB1 overall is a bad choice. We haven't ranked it 2, but it's a coin flip for me just on who you like more and what offense you like more.
Yeah, I was seeing a breakdown where I think it was 60 to 65% of fantasy pros, different league prognosticators will have Gibbs as RB1, and the other like third to 40% have Bijan. So Gibbs is a consensus now, but it's not like a clear cut RB1 where we've seen basically the past few seasons in a row where it's clear who's going to be going at the 101. And with Bijan, like there really is no knock. The only reason I have Gibbs ahead of him is because I have more faith in the Lions offense overall. And the Lions offense, actually taking command of games and having more opportunity for, you know, uh, end zone touchdowns. Perhaps I think Gibbs's touchdown ceiling is higher than Bijan just because of the makeup of the team. But as mixed at best as the vibes in Atlanta are right now, I think that Kevin Stefanski is a fantastic hire for the run game. There's really no reason to be suspect of his ability to unlock Bijan's potential if it even gets greater, or at very least, keep him at where we've seen him. Like, I don't see Bijan regressing under a Stefanski regime.
Agreed. And Bijan's new hairstyle just exudes ultimate confidence. So if you want to know a guy who's feeling good about himself going into the year, Bijan Robinson, that's a guy.
Yeah, it's if you haven't seen the photos, look it up. It's really, really cool. It kind of reminds me of a far more extreme version of the singer of the weekend, and when he came out and had that pineapple hair. Just like it's very, very tall on top, but Bijan definitely takes that to the next level. It looks really cool, and I don't suspect he's going to be wearing this hairstyle in the NFL season, but it makes me like really question if, you know, obviously it looks like it would slow him down, but maybe it could make him faster. I
I
don't know.
just feel like it would hurt when you hit your helmet on things, but maybe I don't understand like the tautness of hair. If I
Yeah,
ever put like my hair in like any sort of pullback, it hurts, and that's like all the hairs in one pullback. But I don't know, maybe he's lived his life like that. I hear that eventually it stops hurting.
we're not as tough as Bijan Robinson
Not, yeah,
and
okay, that's fair. Um, so let's move on to our number three, because our number three is where we first break with consensus pretty big. So our number three running back is Ashton Jeanty of the Las Vegas Raiders. So I'm at three. Willie's got him at four. Consensus rank is at seven. So we're a little bit ahead here, and especially when you talk about just top 15, that's a nice little jump. So I'm a Raiders fan. I'm gonna get that like slight bias out of the way real quick here. But I made the point for him last year, and you may not, you may not think that he delivered on that last year. His rookie year was a bit rocky, but it was on one of the worst coached teams in the league. The Raiders' offensive line was abysmal. Pete Carroll's son was not the coach needed to fix the glaring deficiencies on that offensive line. This year, they get Clint Kubiak. They get Rick Dennison as the O-line coach. Rick Dennison was with the Seahawks last year, where he improved their run game from 28th to 10th. Rick Dennison has won 4 Super Bowls as an O-line coach. He's someone who's very well respected on getting an O-line to gel. There's talent on the O-line for the Raiders now, too. Rick is a huge part of this for me, but don't let 1 year from Jeanty make you forget what his potential is.
Mm-hmm.
Washington doesn't scare me enough, and this is Mike Washington I should be talking about, to think that Jeanty doesn't get a big uptick, especially since they have a vet QB that is in the future and a rookie. This is the year where I think Jeanty, if any, pops. Like, they're not going to rely on their QB a ton, and this is the year where Jeanty is going to be the guy. And everything around him is set up and prepared for a wonderful running game.
Yeah,
including him.
I mean, so you can make the argument like, oh yeah, no way, but I think that Jeanty really did pass the eye test for me last year. I know that there's some quote unquote highlights of him not breaking tackles and just like looking completely, porous as a runner behind that O line, but it was clearly just like the inability of the O line to block for him, where he was just doing so much extra work that he did not have to do, because the explosiveness was there when he was able to get a hole in space and was going up against a defensive line like the Chicago Bears that could not block even a really bad O line. He just had some absolutely monster games, and I think that with Jeanty, the clear upgrade for me is Clint Kubiak and the O line coach Rick. Is it Dennison?
Right.
Coming over from Seattle, like that speaks for itself. Going from 28th in efficiency to 10th is, no small feat, and especially because Seattle's, they had Gray Zabel in the draft. Again, he was just a rookie, but they didn't dramatically upgrade their O line last year. It was just the efficiency of the coaching and just the overall team dynamic. And I think that the Raiders have not only upgraded that efficiency and potential for the coaching, but Tyler Linderbaum coming over from Baltimore is a huge get. He's arguably the best center in the league, and we saw what he did with Derrick Henry the past couple of years. I believe in Jackson Powers Johnson out of Oregon to continue to progress. And I just think that the run game being an identity in Las Vegas, like you said, is the key to their offensive success here. And I think that Mike Washington, we talked about this in the AFC West breakdown, but Mike Washington wasn't drafted to be a complement to Jeanty per se. He was drafted because they had literally no depth on their team whatsoever. They had, Dylan Labubu as their RB2 going into the year. So that was just a hole they needed to fill. And Jeanty he's going to be the workhorse here. I think his receiving game is underrated. There really just is no setbacks to Jeanty, especially because, last year being a down year relative to a first round fantasy pick, he still had almost 1,000 yards, and he did not have a bad season. Like if you had taken him in the third round, you would have been super happy with his performance.
And you saw what he did against the Houston Texans game was one of my favorites because he demolished the Texans, one of the best defenses in the league, and he had an amazing game. So it's like the potential's there, and it's not just like the strength of the opponents that he's going against. He went against an amazing team and just smoked them. Yeah. It's all about what does this coaching look like? What does the morale of this team look like? The morale last year was terrible. Brendan Carroll, Pete Carroll's son again, was the O-line coach last year. And I'm talking about this because you took 2 third-round rookies last year that were developmental rookies, and you placed him with a guy who, according to other players on the O-line, didn't even have coaches. Like, he didn't even coach the players up on the scheme.
Yeah.
They had to do that on their own.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, it was just a nightmare scenario. And this year is the exact opposite. I mean, like, follow the hype, follow the vibe of the Raiders. And I think, like, you can't live your life that way necessarily. But in this particular case, you can understand that there's only up to go. And Jeanty has all the talent in the world to be that guy. And it wouldn't shock me if he's, at the end of the season, one of the most high-volume backs in the league.
Yeah, that's the other key for me here, too, why I have him in my top 5 ahead of consensus. Because, like, obviously, in situations like with Gibbs and Montgomery, if you already have a prolific offensive line set up that's has chemistry, and you have an offense that has just already had extreme amounts of success, it's easy to predict like a split backfield still working out. But with Jeanty, it's really the key is his that puts it up above consensus for me at least is his potential for being that workhorse. And compared to like all the other first round running backs or projected first round running backs this year, it's really hard to argue against the fact that Jeanty has the most upside relative to where he's being taken.
Agreed. And I think that's a good part of it for me too. I love swinging for upside. So what you made, like, we're all humans, right? I try to be as objective as possible in these picks, but I love swinging up for upside. So when I tell you to take someone here, it's because I can see the upside for them being an RB1. And I don't necessarily see the downside for them finishing well outside of the ranking without a major injury, which I'm not guessing for. So
yeah.
And also get the Kenneth Walker talk out of here. Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet is just a different situation.
Yeah.
Like
Mike Washington is not Zach Charbonnet. I mean, he could be really great. It's not about a Mike Washington thing. It's just about the Raiders took him because they had no other running backs on the roster, and they had a decent amount of picks. So of course they're going to swing for one. Yeah,
and Ashton Jeanty hasn't proven to be injury prone like Kenneth Walker has. There's no reason to believe he can't be the guy handling the load. Unless you asked their offensive coordinator last year, who only gave him like 10 carries in a handful of games that they were way down in. Like, seriously, last year was such a bad scenario, and it was still an okay year.
Yeah.
But we'll move on because I could talk about the Raiders all day. I won't do that. Double Doinkers consensus rank for a running back, also a little bit different than the Fantasy Pros consensus, is James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. And again, I apologize for that little voice snap. The COVID So we have him ranked 4th overall. Consensus is 9th. I am at 4. Willie's got him at 5. So James Cook, I'll go ahead and start here with James Cook too. I have a somewhat hard time believing that he can repeat the rushing title and manage another double-digit touchdown year. But honestly, at this point, it's silly to bet against it.
Yeah.
The coaching change likely doesn't actually hurt him because it's the offensive coordinator from last year. Maybe DJ Moore providing a spark for the passing game changes the offensive makeup of this team, but I also kind of doubt that in a significant enough way to downgrade James Cook. And then last year he had over 1,900 scrimmage yards, 14 touchdowns. That's a killer year. And really with the Bills, I don't see why with Josh Allen there they can't repeat something similar.
Well, last year the same argument was that, James Cook can't repeat what he did the year before. Like, I think, I don't have the stats in front of me, but 2 years ago he had a similar stat line where it was like around 1,800 scrimmage yards, 12 touchdowns, and he was going around, pick number 9 or RB rank number 9, early second round. And the same argument was like, well, he did it one year, but we can't bank on him to do it back-to-back years. And then he was even better last year. So taking that 2-year time frame, what that tells me is that he's probably not going to live up to what he did last year because that's really hard to repeat, like you said. But we have a sample size now under the same offensive coordinator. I think they lost one of their guards, their starting guards, to the Saints. But apart from that, their O-line is still the same. Josh Allen is still their quarterback. This is still a run-first team based on Joe Brady's scheme and what he's done in the past. And, again, James Cook not living up to what he did last year is fine, but he's still such a locked-in, starter that doesn't have those dud weeks because this is such a run-first team. I like Ray Davis as a change of pace back. I like Ty Johnson, I believe it is a solid RB3, but this is James Cook's backfield, and he's not injury-prone. He's also a great pass catcher, like many of these other top running backs. And there's a lot less volatility in James Cook's situation compared to some other running backs that are going ahead of him in consensus. That just kind of gives me pause because James Cook has been one of the most consistent running backs in the past couple of years, and he's remaining pretty consistent. So, it doesn't maybe have the upside of Jeanty. No, perhaps not. But does he have the floor of most, a higher floor than most players in the first round? Absolutely.
He's one of the highest floor players for me easily. Yeah. I think it's interesting because when I look at the Buffalo Bills, I'm like, okay, so Josh Allen wants to run less. He hasn't really been able to do that. But if he wants to run less, then James Cook is going to handle a majority of those carries.
Yeah.
And if the passing game upticks, maybe you see more touchdowns. That's a crazy thing to say for someone who's had double-digit touchdowns both years. But like Josh Allen and this Bills team, in theory, should be a high-powered enough offense to continue to produce at a high rate. And I'm not saying necessarily you take him earlier than what his ADP is right now. His ADP is wonderful where it is. 9th RB overall is, I think, early second round. You'd love that if you can, grab. Anyway. Neither here nor there. I love him as a pick. He ranks 4th for a reason. I just think he's got the highest floor, and the upside is clear because it's been there each of the last 2 years.
Yeah, I think that maybe another argument you could make is that there's some potential for a Ray Davis breakout, but if there was, it would have happened by now, in the sense that if it was going to be a 1A, 1B situation, that would have happened last year. There has not been any change up with the coaching staff. There's not been any regression in James Cook's game the past couple of years that would lead me to believe he's going to get less carries. And even if he did get slightly less and it was more of a committee, he's still, in my opinion, going to get more carries because, like you said, Josh Allen's health, and as he gets older, he's going to be running less, and that's only going to benefit James Cook. So I think he's a great pick.
So he's consensus ranked 9 overall, like I said. So we're higher on James Cook here, especially when you look at some of the names that are coming up. You might be like, how can you have James Cook over him? Well, we'll explain. So our double Doinkers ranked 5 is Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. He's consensus ranked 4. Willie's got him at 6. I've got him at 5. So let me talk about Jonathan Taylor. And Willie, I know I've monopolized the starting of these. I've just been higher on these first set of players.
Oh, you're good.
So with Jonathan Taylor, I'm feeling a little bit down on him compared to what everyone else is. And it's hard for me to conceptualize why exactly. So follow me down this journey, if you will. And again, we're doing COVID journeys, so bear with me here for a quick second. Jonathan Taylor had 20 touchdowns last year and over 1,900 yards from scrimmage. He has the talent. We've seen it. But the team was a surprise last year that faded pretty hard once Daniel Jones got injured. Jones isn't going to be at full health for the beginning of the season. And honestly, with his injury, who knows if he'll actually get there during the season. JT doesn't need to repeat the beginning of last season again to be relevant, but I do think it's going to be a different sort of output that we get from the Colts in general this year, which brings me down on Jonathan Taylor. Not all the way down on Jonathan Taylor, but I'm not expecting that first, 8-9 week just explosion of touchdowns where you're getting hat trick game, when you're just winning weeks based on Jonathan Taylor. I think it's going to be more reasonable. Still probably a pretty solid RB1 right in the middle, like 6-7. That wasn't a joke. I didn't mean to do that. But just different.
It's with Jonathan Taylor, and this is something that I will probably rant about more when we talk about another player that's going a lot lower than Jonathan Taylor. But I talk about this ad nauseum, but the recency bias can get really out of hand in fantasy. Again, Jonathan Taylor, if he'd been healthy every single year of his career, he would be talked about as the best running back in the league, arguably. And again, this is not projecting injuries because he's been healthy the past couple seasons and throughout his career. He's just had some freak injuries. But with Jonathan Taylor, like, he's absolutely being drafted, I think, at or near his ceiling. And the thing with him is that he absolutely can be a workhorse back. He's one of the most prolific college workhorse running backs in history at Wisconsin. But we talk about, some running backs getting older and starting to reach the cliff. And someone like Jonathan Taylor, he has more mileage on his body in terms of carries than most running backs in the 2020s. And that includes, going back to college at Wisconsin. So with Taylor, like, it really was a perfect storm for him last year. And he's such a talented running back that, of course, he had the opportunity to produce, and he really showed up. But like you said, the Colts, even if they are able to come close to what they did last year and get Daniel Jones back, we can't ignore the fact that Taylor's game suffered after Jones went down, not because Taylor was injured or, he fell off as a player, but simply because the Colts offense wasn't able to sustain the same magic for those, for that first half of the season. So Taylor, I think, is extremely talented, but like, I just don't see a world where he repeats anything close to what he did the first half of last season. And the reports coming out of camp is that Daniel Jones is healthy. He's probably going to start. Like, players somehow recovered from Achilles really fast. But again, he's coming off an Achilles tear. He had another major knee injury 2 years ago. Okay, so he starts week 1. Are we going to see the Daniel Jones that we saw the first half of last season? I don't think so.
And I would be extremely worried about this. I mean, we saw Kirk Cousins come back from an Achilles tear. We saw Aaron Rodgers come back from an Achilles tear. If you may remember, both years immediately after the Achilles tear, with old quarterbacks, mind you, but the immediate year after these Achilles tears, they both stunk. And they got better the year after. So it wasn't just that this is who they are now. It was that they're having a physical repercussion to having an Achilles tear the year before, even though it's technically, healthy and healed.
And we've also heard out of camp, Alec Pierce is on the PUP list with an ankle injury. He may or may not be getting some minor surgery. And, of course, another weapon, like, if it was another running back on the team, like, okay, this opens opportunity for Jonathan Taylor. But I think we forget how much Alec Pierce benefited Taylor's game last year, where him catching those deep shots down the field and getting 30-yard gains, opening up opportunity for Taylor to just rip it to the end zone. There's just a lot of moving parts, and Taylor, like, I would be very shocked if he finishes where he did last year.
Pittman being gone too worries me a little bit.
Yeah.
And so just to give some context to what you're saying, Jonathan Taylor's now 27, which 27 used to be a cliff for running backs. We've seen Derrick Henry and Christian McCaffrey kind of like challenge that recently, but not a lot of other running backs have challenged it in the same way. He has over almost 2,500 carries across his college and NFL career combined. 1,500 of those in the NFL, 900 in college. So, like, it shouldn't be underrated how many college carries he had because he's only recently passed that.
Yeah, he was insane at Wisconsin. Like,
So, and we'll talk about a few more older running backs here, but that's the sitch on Jonathan Taylor. Let's move on. Our number 6 RB, and this is one I'm definitely going to let you start on because there's quite a big gap in our rankings here. So number 6 is Saquon Barkley of the Philadelphia Eagles. He's consensus ranked 10, so we're ahead of him on consensus. Willie's at 3. So Willie, go ahead and tell us why you have Saquon so high.
It would be easy for me to go on a rant about Kevin Patullo's offense, and I think that's the crux of some of my argument, at least, is the Eagles' offense last year was just a mess. We didn't really see it in terms of wins because the Eagles still won the division. They didn't get far in the playoffs, and they did spread the ball around a lot more last year. It was less run focused, at least in games. It became less run focused, but I am of the belief that they really just did not know what they were doing. They weren't utilizing Saquon in the same way, and he just had some games where like he was not at all the player he was the previous year. But I do want to say, and how soon we forget things. Previous year, Saquon was Offensive Player of the Year. He had, if he had finished and played Week 18, Game 17, he would have most likely set the rushing record in the NFL. And he was disappointing relative to his draft status last year, but I think that his body needed some rest. Like, he was coming off an amazing season, a regression year was expected, but he's far from washed. Again, he's older than Jonathan Taylor. He's got quite a bit of mileage on his body in terms of carries and yards, but him being RB10 when we saw him still finish, I forget his exact finish last year, but he was still an RB1 last year. And to knock him all the way down and expect him just to repeat what we saw last year when we have a new offensive coordinator, we've lost A.J. Brown. We know what his talent is. The offensive line for the Eagles is healthy again. I see Saquon really returning to what we saw a couple years ago. Maybe not to that level ever again. I'm not saying that, but I think that's Saquon's game. And I've said this a lot about other running backs, but Saquon's game also thrives through the passing work. And I don't have this specific tweet. I just closed the window here, but there's a beat reporter for the Eagles that talked about that the approach for this year is to not only have Barkley be obviously the featured back here, but also get a lot more work in the receiving game. And the years that we've seen him really, boost up a few spots in the running back rankings is when he's been catching those receiving touchdowns. And I think with A.J. Brown's absence and, a new offensive coordinator, a healthy O-line, I think Barkley being down at RB10 is pretty ridiculous to me. I think that I can confidently say he has absolutely the upside and skill set and situation to finish as a top 5 running back again. And I would much more confidently take him over. I should say much more confidently. Like, I like him the same level of around where I like James Cook, but I think Saquon, because we've seen it before, could produce at that absolutely RB1 fantasy breaking level again.
So let me ask you a few questions here, and they'll be pointing questions. Okay, so I apologize beforehand. So at the age of 29, with 50 more carries than Jonathan Taylor, you said don't worry about it, but why not worry about it?
50 more career carries than Jonathan Taylor?
Yeah.
Because I think that Barkley is just a much more efficient as a pass catcher. And, no disrespect to Taylor. He had an amazing year last year, but a lot of his fantasy production and explosion came from those hat trick games. And Barkley, obviously scored a lot of touchdowns a couple years ago, but his game and his success didn't just come from getting hat tricks. It was just because of how he was utilized both as a runner and as a receiver, and really just taking over games. And I have a lot more faith in the Eagles offense than I do the Colts offense this year.
Okay, fair enough answer. Let me ask you then a follow-up, okay? So 2 years ago, Barkley had 15 40-plus yard rushing touchdowns. Last year, he only had 6. Do you think that's indicative of Kevin Patullo's offense, or do you think that may be a fall-off of his?
I think it's most indicative of the injuries to the offensive line. I think Lane Johnson missed some time last year. They had some younger players that were stepping in, and all of that was the perfect storm with Patullo at the helm to just kind of make a mess of a situation, or not correct the course of having Barkley be the focal point. And again, I don't want to knock and do comparisons to other players, but CMC being older than Barkley and going RB3, that just reeks of recency bias. He's consensus RB3. That reeks of so much consensus bias because CMC is older, has a more prolific injury history, and has more competition in the receiving game, in my opinion, than Barkley does. again, I'm not saying that CMC's receiving upside is going to just disappear, but the recency bias is just too much for me. Barkley was incredible 2 years ago. He is a steal at RB10 consensus, and in yours.
Yeah, and so I mean, I'm out on him for one reason, and that is I think for me the age and the carry amount is a little bit too much for me to see the upside increase the way. I don't think we've seen a lot of players have the amount of volume that he had 2 years ago and then ever bounce back. And that's where my mind is at. Is like that amount of volume in 1 year wrecks a player. And I could be wrong about that. Barkley could be the different guy. There's 100% the chance of that, right? So I'm willing to give that up. Last year he still had 1,400 yards. He still had 9 touchdowns, right? So it wasn't like an awful burnout year, but RB14. I just worry about that, and that's why I can't put him higher than RB10 for me. You know what I mean? Like, it's not that I don't see the path to what you're saying. It makes a lot of sense, and the Eagles still have enough dominant pieces on this team in general for it to exist. I just think his legs would be tired, you know?
I think last year was a bit of a rest year for him. I mean, he, like you said, he wasn't as focused as much in the offense, and I don't see him. I guess basically, like, I could see him finishing as RB10. It wouldn't shock me, but I think that's his floor right now, and I think this may be his last big hurrah of a giant year. I don't project like him to ever repeat what he did 2 years ago, or like even continue to do what I think he does this year. I just think that the Eagles' offense suffered when they turned away from him in the run game, and I think they're going to go back to him as both a runner and a receiver in a big way.
That's fair. That's fair. My last little point, I suppose I'll of wariness with him is that I think that this Eagles team is going to want to pass a lot more just to show that Kevin Patullo sucked at the pass, and it wasn't any of them. Which you're right, it could bode well for Barkley because he can catch the ball. But that does worry me. But regardless, like I said, I see where you're coming from, and I held your feet to the fire, and you answered pretty good. So yeah, number 6 is Saquon Barkley. Let's move on to number 7 because number 7 is another fun one. We've broken from consensus here a little bit. So number 7, we have Omarion Hampton of the Los Angeles Chargers. He's consensus ranked 11. Will, you got him at 8. I've got him at 6. That's not a huge spread. They're both ahead of consensus. So I'll start though. So for Omarion Hampton, what it is for me is, gosh, we talked about it so many times. It's going to really hurt us if this is not the case. But Mike McDaniel is here now. And we've seen how RBs do in his offense. Like, seriously, they do so good. Look up all the RBs during Mike McDaniel's tenure in Miami. And you can argue that it's talent. I would argue that the scheme does matter a lot in these things. Pay attention, because Omarion Hampton has talent. Duh. I guess I shouldn't tell you duh. You wouldn't be listening to this if you didn't know. So, the Lions should be better this year, especially if healthy. A great supporting cast and a head coach that would love to run the ball as much as he possibly could if given the opportunity. I think really the only question mark for me is the workload with Vidal and Keaton. But honestly, he should stand above the rest enough to have a very significant year. I think these guys can take some volume away from him, right? But also we see every single running back with some volume taken away from them, as I've said prior. I think that this team this year, one has to prove something for a lot of different reasons, for a lot of players on that team, for the coach, for everyone. If the Chargers come out and just fall flat again, who's getting fired? Every single person, you know? And 2, the talent on that team is so good, offensively and defensively, that this run game, I just don't see anywhere to go but up, 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 up. And it wouldn't shock me if they have one of the best run games in the NFL at the end of the year.
Yeah, I agree with all those points. I think that they're very different players, and it's not one-to-one. Again, I'm here with the comparisons tonight. But Jeanty and Hampton, I think, both have very similar levels of upside. I'm higher on Jeanty, really just for 2 reasons. One would be the increased competition with, Hampton and Vidal as opposed to Mike Washington. But I'm really tired of a narrative of regimes that just drafted a first-round running back 2 years ago or a year ago. The regime is still here. A first-round pick on a running back is okay. Maybe you can make the argument for the Seahawks and Jadarian Price this year, but that was the last pick of the first round. Seahawks were already loaded. When regimes spend a first-round pick on a running back, that running back is going to be heavily featured. That is a luxury pick especially for a team like the Chargers that had a lot of other holes and the Raiders that had a lot of other holes. Like if you're using that first round pick, that player is going to be the focal point of your offense, at least in many games. And I'll double down on that just by seeing Mike McDaniel come over. And the other argument I'd be higher on Jeanty for upside than Hampton would just be that it's too early to say, but there was some injury events last year with Hampton. I think that was probably more because of the really banged up O line and the Chargers kind of not being able to fix that because they had so many injuries last year. So maybe slightly more competition and injury history, but I think Hampton and Jeanty both are year 2 players that have some of the most upside of any running backs in fantasy this year. I had Hampton in fantasy as a rookie last year. He did kind of let me down, but it wasn't because of his play at all. It was just injuries and opportunity because of those injuries and, of the situation of the O-line. But yeah, Hampton, I think there's a list of players you could predict to be RB1. But Hampton is a player that I could see becoming RB1 overall in fantasy, and it wouldn't shock me.
Same. I mean, look, if you're worried about Vidal, because Vidal did look good at times last year. If you're worried about Mitchell, don't. With Mitchell, I wouldn't prognosticate that at all. That's like, if it happens, it happens. And that's crazy. But we haven't seen anything that suggests that that'll happen, really. With Vidal, we have seen some things. But remember, Mike McDaniel, 2020, 2019, 2021, somewhere around there, he had both Mostert and Achane as top 10 running backs. Yeah, like I think Mostert finished as RB1 overall or RB2 overall. Mostert. And that wasn't the guy who everyone thought was electric, but he scored a ciabatta ton of touchdowns. You know?
And that was of Achane, and again, no disrespect to the Vidal or Mitchell. Mitchell especially has that explosiveness potential in his game. But even if they have really great surprising seasons, they're not going to reach the level of Achane to Mostert. And if Hampton's Mostert's in the situation, that's a slam dunk pick. And I think that a lot of Mostert's game came from getting those touchdowns, and it's hard to prognosticate touchdowns, but Hampton is the kind of back that is, big and powerful and will be used at the goal line quite a bit. So I think even more so to predict him being fantasy RB1 overall is one thing, but I think predicting him to lead the league in touchdowns would not shock me. That's the kind of back that he is, and that's the kind of system he's in.
No, I agree with that. I mean, just watch any of the games last year, right? So you've got a quarterback and Tua, and I guess I'm talking about the Dolphins games. I should be specific last year, where you have the quarterback Tua, who's playing at maybe the worst level of his career at this point. You've got a team that is just despondent. They have Kim come out of the water as fish. That's bad. I mean, they're dead in the water. The fish are dead in the water. And yet somehow, some way, halfway through the season, they completely turn it around. And if you're watching Achane this whole time, he is just having a killer, phenomenal season. And the thing is that every time they get in the red zone, Mike McDaniel knows how to get that exact scheme, that exact seam to get his running back into the end zone. And Achane was good at finishing, but why can't Omarion Hampton be good at finishing? There's no reason. It's just, for me, it's like, if you want upside, he's going at RB11 right now, consensus. I have him at 6. I'm taking him ahead of quite a few of these other guys.
Yeah, Hampton, I think that, again, the risk, like we mentioned, is possibly there, but when you compare him to other running backs going higher than him, it totally mitigates any risk, I think, that's banked in at RB11. That is just he looked great when he was healthy, and the O-line was healthier last year, and that's enough in and of itself. But now we have McDaniel in here. It's a lot to get excited about.
Are people down on McDaniel?
I don't understand why that would be the case, but I suppose. But I can't wrap my head around. There's no offensive failings that we saw from McDaniel that relates to the run game at all in Miami.
No.
That's just a fact.
I just remember when the Chargers hired him, I was so upset because I thought it was an amazing hire. I was like, this offense is going to blast off right now. You have Justin Herbert back there calling plays instead of Tua, right? And that's not really fair to Tua, but Tua, with the amount of concussions he's had and just the degradation of his play over the last couple of years versus Justin Herbert, who continuously has looked the same. He's thrown away some pretty important games, but like
he's consistent. So
anyway, so Omarion Hampton is like, he's my upside pick. I love this guy. I would love to have him on my team. I'm okay with RB1, honestly. Like, I really don't think his floor is that low. I'm really not worried about anyone else in this team.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the next guy, and this is one that we're pretty different on. And I'm going to let you start here, Willie, because you're higher on him. So Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers, we've got him ranked 8th. The consensus rank is 3. Well, you've got him at 7. I've got him at 9. So we're both below consensus, but maybe you want to talk about that for a minute.
I mean, for him, with CMC, we talk about not wanting to prognosticate or predict injuries. But, and this isn't the whole of my argument here, but I mean, everything I've said about recency bias, like, he was incredible last year. Not particularly as a runner, but as a receiver. And him repeating that again, it obviously could happen because he has that potential, but I do really worry about injuries. And I think RB3 is such a high price tag to pay for a player that has been so inconsistent with availability. But I think my original argument here and why I'm lower on him, not just because of concerns about the injury, want to lower him to RB3, but actually take him out of my top 5, is because I have faith in this Niners team actually switching it up a bit and not having to rely on CMC. There was quite a bit of injuries last year to the team, but they bring in Mike Evans. Hopefully Ricky Pearsall is healthy. They bring in Christian Kirk, and there's more options on this team to go to for the receiving game. And I think the big boon of CMC's game last year was that he was catching so many passes and so many words are escaping me, checkdowns from Brock Purdy. And I just don't think that they're going to have to rely on him as much this year, which could really help him in the run game in the sense that, like, he actually will be used as more of a runner than a receiver. But I just don't see the upside from him being there as just, more of a running back. And yeah, I think that, we could talk about injuries all day, but I think that, CMC was a cheat code last year for the Niners, but they're going to have to switch things up. They have Mike Evans now. And I don't see a world where CMC repeats what he did last year. I could be completely wrong, but I would much rather have a safer pick like a James Cook or a younger, more upside pick than an Ashton Jeanty than CMC as a top 5 pick in the first round. It's too rich for me.
I don't disagree heavily. So this is a risk I don't really want to take after his remarkably healthy year in 2025. We're talking about health again, but like really, really, really. It's just a risk I don't want to take. His rushing efficiency was pretty bad. He had 3.9 yards per carry. I've seen a lot of different excuses for that. But really, regardless, I think it's a lot to ask a 30-year-old running back to get more efficient in the running game.
Yeah, and it's not like the Niners completely upgraded their O-line this year. It's not like CMC struggled because of the O-line last year. It's just it kind of has remained the same. He's getting older. And I think 3.9 yards per carry for a player that is also a great receiver and, over 30 years old is very respectable. But at the same time, something's gonna switch here. If he's not injured, either he's going to be less involved in the receiving game or his efficiency per carry is going to go down or remain the same. There's no upside here that has existed in past years. Something's got to give, and there's just too many question marks for me.
That is also to say that the division that he's playing in right now is one that I don't necessarily love to have a running back up against. If you're really going to have to go against Myles Garrett and Aaron Donald, 2 times this year, and then whoever the Seahawks are pulling up, it's not a favorable division. I mean, no. So his pass catching still, in my opinion, does give him a path to the RB1 overall, but that path is getting way more treacherous each year, and. We're not even going to talk about Derrick Henry, I don't think. Not in this pod, which is crazy. But it's the similar idea. It's okay, so yeah, he might definitely return value, but CMC's getting drafted too high.
That's the thing here. It's just too high.
It's okay, at some point, I know what CMC did, and I know what he means to a team when he's really on it. 3 is just too high. I can't with that. Like there's too much risk in here. This is very, very risky. I don't hate risk. However, this one feels like all of the risk only points to bad, and the upside is getting shallower and shallower as as I speak every moment.
Yeah, and again, like the upside is still there, but like when you compare him to somebody like James Cook, like CMC had an incredible year last year, no doubt about it, but he wasn't that much higher than someone like James Cook. It wasn't like that extravagantly better of a player. Like again, not taking away from his season in fantasy, but like the upsides there were pretty close, and I think that that gap has just gotten bigger this year.
So let's move on here. We'll go to number 9. Number 9 on our list here is Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals. Consensus has him at 6. So we're a little bit lower on Chase Brown than consensus, but Willie's got him at 9. I've got him at 7. So I'll go ahead and open up this one. He's the one player who I have him at 7, and I feel like he might deserve higher, honestly. He started last year as the RB34 in fantasy points per game for the first 5 weeks. He finished as the RB8 overall. It was a massive and sustained late season push that brought him to that. And which does everyone seem to remember his season by at this point? I think a lot of people still think of him as the bust that happened at the start of the season. But by the end of the season, he was the guy who you want him to be. Burrow being hurt clearly impacted his game. And, as we talked about previously, they have Joe Flacco there from the beginning. So that risk is mitigated. Chase, for me, is like that line of wonderful RB1 to have on my team where I still feel super confident about him if he ends up being my RB1.
I agree. I think he's a never very safe pick. I just think because of the Bengals offense and, obviously very consistent from last year, O-line wise, play calling wise, there's a lot to be excited about. I like having him at RB9 because if you look at last year, like, first half of season finishing around RB34 is just really abysmal for where he was taken. And finishing, having so many prolific games at the end of the year to finish as RB8 is extremely impressive. But a lot of that comes from, I'm not going to say luck, but like he had a string of just extremely successful games in weeks like 11 to 16 last year. And I don't think, every week is going to be like that again this year. So I think that really he ends up coming out somewhere more to the middle where we see more consistency, and he finishes around that RB 8, 9, 10, 7, 6 range. But, I don't think he's going to have as many big games. And I think RB 8 or 9 or wherever we have him is pretty solid. And I think that's a very safe place for him to be predicted to finish. I think that if we saw Chase Brown become the type of player where we've seen years of like Saquon or CMC, it probably would have happened by now. So I don't see him having that upside of having another huge breakout year because I think it would have happened by now. But he's just a very safe pick, and I think his ceiling as a receiver is perhaps untapped, and he doesn't have much competition. I think if he's your RB1 and you pair him with a really solid wide receiver one, that's a good way to start your team.
One thing I think is underrated about Chase Brown, and I've talked about this a little bit in our divisional breakdown, is I feel like halfway through the season, or maybe it was closer to like 2/3 of the way through the season, he started really taking on a leadership role in the locker room that I think is underrated. He was the one who was talking on behalf of the offense to the defense when they gave up the big games. I remember after Loveland scored that touchdown, late in the fourth, and he's just like, we did everything we possibly could. Every single time they scored, we came out and we scored. What is happening? And I think the coaches see that, and I do think stuff like that will eventually get rewarded. Zach Taylor scares me a little bit, but I think Chase Brown has carved out like his place here, and I think he will be rewarded.
I think so too. I think that, the Bengals, as much as they struggled over the years, having Flacco there as a backup to start the year is important. And like the Bengals offense has never really been bad. It's just hinged on Burrow being injured. And Brown is really just the epitome of consistency when the rest of the Bengals offense is consistent. And it's so far, it seems like it's going to be that way this year.
So we'll move on. At rank 10, we've got Travis Etienne Jr. And if you're confused who I'm talking about, he used to be called Etienne, and he corrected everyone this offseason. It is Achane. That is how you pronounce his name. He is in New Orleans, and now he may have his name pronounced correctly. I think that's a fair question, or a fair request is what I'm trying to say. So consensus has him ranked at 18. We've got him at 10. 18 is crazy to me. Willie, you've got him at 12. I've got him at 8. So I'll go ahead and start off with Travis here. If your main worry with Travis is that Kamara is there, then I'd guess there's really no worries. In New Orleans, we're headed into the second year of Coach Kellen Moore's tenure, and his offenses have usually been pretty brilliant. And that's a long history of his offenses doing very well. We saw signs of life from the Shuck-led Saints, and Travis is no slouch. I mean, we've seen him play. We've seen him be a top 3 RB for stretches at a time. And it's not just the scenario that he's in. It's also that he's a skilled guy. I honestly expect him to have a massive year. And if the offense levels up at all, he has a path to a top 5 finish, in my opinion. Realistically, the only argument that I've heard that makes any sense is Kamara. And Kamara hasn't looked like the same Kamara in not just last year, but like a handful of years at this point. He hasn't been able to take the same amount of workload. And having the second RB who can catch the ball, like look at Bashal Tutin last year. It's not like it's a terrible thing,
Here's the thing, and again, it's a new situation for Achane, but looking at the stats from last year, so Kamara played in 11 games, and he had 471 rushing yards and a touchdown. Receiving wise, which is where his game often extends to, and he's very prolific at, he had 33 receptions for 186 yards and no touchdowns. Looking at Bashal Tutin, who was competing with Achane last year, he had 15 games, 307 yards, so just 100 less than Kamara had, with 5 touchdowns. And his receiving stats, he only had 10 receptions, but he had 2 receiving touchdowns. So those statistics, again, Kamara played last games, but I think we can expect Kamara to play around 11 games this year, given his age and history. That's a 1-to-1 comparison to me in a lot of ways. Like, that's obviously a broad take, but Tutin to Achane last year is really Kamara to Achane this year, except Kamara is staying in New Orleans because he loves the city, he loves the team. He's just a complimentary back to Achane, I think, because the Saints went out and paid Achane 4 years. I think it was like $60 million, like a very high contract for this player, to have him on the team, to have him be a piece of his offense. So all the arguments I've been seeing about Kamara, eating into his workload, sure, he might get more receiving work at times. He might be there in passing down situations or third down situations. But Achane exploded last year, and he had a down year the year before, but he's been extremely consistent in the Jaguars offense. And now he comes to a team that has Kellen Moore calling the plays, and we saw Kellen Moore with Barkley a couple years ago, and he's really proven himself as at least at times, a run-first coach, and a coach that at the very least can have a prolific offense, fantasy productive offense. So the Kamara argument is I just completely am throwing that out. I like him as a complimentary back, but this is 100% Achane's backfield, and even if he's only getting worst case scenario, 60-65% of the carries, Achane's also a fantastic receiver, and Kamara is not. It's not a 1A 1B situation. I will double, triple, quadruple down on that. I think that people are way overestimating Kamara's involvement, at least in terms of how it eats into Achane, because Achane, he was paid. He's meant to be the piece of this ascending, in my opinion, offense. I had him at RB12, but I kind of waffled and maybe wanting to go a little higher on him. I think you having him at RB8 is something I also agree with. I think he could be a slam dunk this year.
It's just kind of crazy to me that he's at 18 at all. I mean, people really must be scared of Kamara. And if you ask yourself, okay, so the last few years they were saving Kamara for what? What were they saving Kamara for, right? Were they saving him so he could compete with Achane? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. Is this a team that you think is going to have Super Bowl aspirations, or are they walking their way towards it, And I would guess that they're walking their way towards it. They're not quite there yet. So if they're saving Kamara, guess what? They'll probably still save Kamara. I don't see a world in which Kamara is the guy who comes out and he's just yes, I catch 1,000,000 balls anywhere. Derek Carr's not there, guys.
No,
this is a different offense with a different coach. Kellen Moore is a different dude.
And I think this also strengthens the argument that Kamara's receiving work is going to be less featured, because they have an incredible yards after catch threat in Jordan Tyson now, and they have their elite slot guy in Chris Olave, and they also have last year they didn't have a great pass catching running back to complement Kamara. Now they have Travis Achane, who at times has been a great pass catching back, and who has thrived next to another great catching back in Tootin. So the Kamara argument, I just can't. I have blinders on maybe, but I just cannot see a world where he threatens Achane's workload.
Yeah, same. And I mean, I think the opportunity here for him is huge. And he's worked with opportunity like this before and shown that he can deliver on it. So, like I said, I have him at 8. Top 5 wouldn't shock me.
No, I would not.
So at our consensus rank 11, we have Cam Skattebo of the New York Giants. He is consensus ranked 16 on Fantasy Pros. We've got him 11. I've got him at 13. So, Willie, why don't you get us started off with Skattebo?
Skattebo is really... I'm saying this about vetting my other takes, but he's really like perhaps the most boomer bust running back pick in fantasy. Because, if you look at everything that's in his favor, the lack of receiving options on the Giants, the lack of backfield competition, Tyrone Tracy's a great RB2, but Skattebo was the RB1 when he was healthy last year, and I don't see his role changing. And then they bring in, not only do they bring in John Harbaugh to be their new head coach, who's always been run first, defense heavy, and then what do they do in the offseason? They use their top picks on defense and offensive line, and they don't bring any competition for Skattebo via the draft or free agency. So, talk about like dark horse RB1 overalls. Skattebo on paper, just in terms of scheme and his ability that we've seen, he has it. Like, this Giants team maybe won't be great this year, maybe it could be, but everything around him suggests that he's going to be not only the workhorse back, but a workhorse back on a team that is going to use a workhorse back. Like, not just the running back that's featured a lot, but like he will be the offense. And all that to say, like, the RB1 overall finish is, it's a dark horse take, but it could happen. But the negatives here are purely based on him as a player, his recklessness. He was doing a backflip at some streaming convention a couple weeks ago after coming off, a broken ankle. And I don't know the guy. I don't want to make assumptions about how he treats his body or his mental clarity in terms of having foresight in regards to injury, but it seems pretty non-existent. So when I say boomer bust pick, I mean like boomer bust. Like, he could absolutely eat this year. He could average 20 fantasy points per game. I would not be shocked. The Giants have upgraded their O-line. Harbaugh's here. There's a lot to like about it. There's also just a lot to be concerned about. And he's a hard one for me to crack and to rank. But I do think that if you take him this year, acknowledge that it could be a risky pick, but also acknowledge that it could really pay off.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, like, the thing that Cam has going for him is like this gigantic touchdown upside. He is super physical. He can get a ton of touchdowns. And if Jackson Dart is just running all over the place between the 20s, give it to Cam once you get into the red zone. I mean, like, we've seen Harbaugh do this with Lamar, and Skattebo can be that guy. Now, Skattebo can also catch passes. I don't know that Jackson Dart's going to be asked to, throw it down or check down very often. We'll see. And with Malik Neighbors, maybe starting the season hurt, maybe starting it healthy, who knows? There's not a ton of receiving options on this team. I mean, they signed Odell Beckham. Well, good for you. He's back in New York. They've got Darius Slayton. And gosh, if they have anyone else, I'm just totally spacing their name. So there's not a ton.
It's not, yeah.
Yeah. So this is going to be a running team. And Cam Skattebo, shockingly, somehow is going to be that dude. Now, and he just got cleared for training camp as of today. That is July 29th. So he should be good to go. Don't do any more flips, dude. And if Cam and Jackson Dart could stop trying to out-stupid each other, that would be good.
There's that risk baked in. Just the injuries and the lack of foresight. Yeah.
That's honestly what scares me the most about Cam, actually, is not even just his injury, but also his and Jackson Dart's injury. There's two players that you have to worry about, because if Jackson Dart goes down, I actually don't see how this team moves the ball very well.
Yeah, it's hard because like I think that when Dart was injured, it was after Skattebo was out. I'm looking at Skattebo's stats here, and keep in mind this is before Harbaugh was here. This is before they upgraded their O line with Francis Mauigoa out of Miami with a 10th overall pick. There's a lot of things that are contributing to the possibility of us getting even better. But at a 17 game pace last year, Skattebo was on track for over 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns through the ground. And receiving wise, he's a bit underrated. He was on track for over 60 receptions and over 500 yards and over 8 touchdowns through the air.
It's huge. That's 20 touchdowns you're talking about.
That's 20 touchdowns.
Yeah. So like I said, he can score touchdowns. And I mean, you watch his game, he's super duper physical, right? The injury that happened wasn't necessarily a result of the physicality. That's the crazy thing, is the physicality was there, and then he just happened to break his ankle in like a weird move. The comp that I've always seen with his game is Mike Allstott. And if you haven't watched Mike Allstott play from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, you probably should, because he plays very similar. And Mike Allstott is a Hall of Famer. Cam Skattebo doesn't have to be fast if he can just plow through everybody. And I don't know what it is about this kid, but his head seems to really be made of bricks.
Yeah, in a good way and a bad way.
Yes. So, you're betting on Brickhead. Could be a good bet to take sometimes. I'm just saying, it's not always a bad bet.
Yeah. He's definitely a fun one to draft. Not even based on his personality, but in terms of his upside and his just potential, it's a fun pick to make. It's fun to. He's going to have those games where it's just like, oh man, I'm winning my weekend. It's only Thursday night.
And shout out Citrus Heights, where he's from. Not a lot of players come from Citrus Heights, and it's also not very orangey there. Citrus Heights being a misnomer. So we'll move on. At number 12, we have a player that I don't love to talk about because he's with a team that I hate, verily. Kenneth Walker III with the Kansas City Chiefs. His consensus at 15, so we're actually a little bit higher on him than consensus. Well, you had him at 14. I had him at 12. So I'll go ahead and start off here. Kenneth Walker III for me is this question, and it's this question first and foremost. Do I really not bank on injuries when I'm ranking these players? And if I don't, I think that Kenneth Walker has the opportunity for a huge year. Kenneth has one, he destroyed the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, and they remember that. They went out and got him. He is an amazing home run hitter as an RB, which sometimes is a positive and a negative. Like, he'll dance around sometimes in the backfield too much. I can see Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid being frustrated by that, and limiting carries at points.
Kind of reminds me of Le'Veon Bell, where he has that hesitation.
Mm-hmm. But also, this is a team where the defense can't focus in on the run. And if they can't focus on the run, he can find those holes. He could have a fantastic year. And as it has been said about the Chiefs over and over and over, if they just had a running back who could take advantage of how good Patrick Mahomes is, they would have an RB1. Well, here's the guy. He is that good. I talked about him last year as being that good. I hesitate to this year just because I hate the Chiefs. But it is true for me that he is that good. Now, the question is, can he not get his ankle hurt? And that's what I think you're betting on.
Yeah, and this is a particularly significant case because it's not banking on injuries. It's banking on a player who has had injuries that's never been a workhorse in the NFL. That's the thing. When you look at the sample size for the Super Bowl run, Charbonnet went down with the ACL tear, and Kenneth Walker was that workhorse bell cow. But you have to take into context that was a 3-4 game stretch, and he was playing towards the Super Bowl. So it's a unique situation, that he was able to produce there is incredible, but there's some other vibes there, than just like playing for the Kansas City Chiefs. One, I think the Super Bowl run vibe is a lot more exciting in my opinion than playing with the Chiefs. With Walker and me, like a lot of people are banking on his upside because, he's the best running back the Chiefs have had on paper this decade. And there's an opportunity there for him to become the bell cow that Mahomes has never had. But I still don't have strong faith that he's just going to become this, player that we saw during the Super Bowl run in terms of his usage. I think that there's no players on the Chiefs roster that are quite as good as Charbonnet. But I really do like their 5th round pick out of Nebraska, Emmett Johnson. I like Rashard Smith, who was a late round pick out of SMU last year. They did bring in DiMaccardio, from the Cardinals, who's just kind of an RB4. Cool. But I think that there's some young potential here, and I think that the whole idea of the Chiefs paying Walker, and I've said this before, wasn't just because they want him to be the bell cow, but it's because they're addressing a need that they've not addressed in years. So bringing him in is just to have an actual possible elite starting running back, which they haven't had. It's not to completely transform their offense. It's just to have a stable presence that can be an RB1. There's a world where I'm wrong, and Walker is there to be the bell cow, and he produces as a top 5 running back, and I eat my words. But also, baked into that is the risk of him doing that for the first time in his career and having that workhorse role for the first time in his career, and we don't know what that looks like in terms of injuries. So I think he's a safe pick because he's in a good offense, and they paid him. I think he's a risky pick because his role isn't clearly defined, and the injuries could possibly be there.
Yeah, and I think one thing that hurts him even in an elite offense, if this turns out to be an elite offense, they weren't last year, but if it does turn out to be an elite offense again, is that it's not that he can't pass catch, he's just not particularly proficient at it. And with the way Mahomes plays, I think like a player who can pick up and pass catch during a broken play would really thrive. And that's just not Kenneth Walker's game. I mean, he's again, it's not that he can't catch passes, is that as we've seen time and time again, he's just not overly good at it.
Yeah, and he's never had to be that. And I think that we didn't see a lot from Brashard Smith last year, but Brashard Smith is that. I believe he's a converted receiver. And again, like they paid Walker, so he's clearly he's the number one there. But I really do like Emmett Johnson out of Nebraska. I've seen a little bit of his tape, and he's a player I could have seen going higher in the draft. So is this going to be a running back by committee? I don't think necessarily, but I think it's going to be more of a committee than like this, more of a threat to be a committee than the Saints and Kamara, in my opinion. I think that the Chiefs are smart, and I think Walker being overused just isn't very likely.
Shows up in a John Madden shirt to a Chiefs. silly dude. Okay, we'll move on to maybe our most controversial pick.
Whoa.
And that is at our consensus ranking 13. We have Achane of the Miami Dolphins. He is ranked 5 on Fantasy Pros. Well, you've got him at 10. I've got him at 17. I guess I'm going to go ahead and start with 17 because it's kind of an egregious difference between 5 and 17. And it really is as simple for me as, what does this offense look like? Can this team support Achane the same way it did in the past? And does it want to?
Mm-hmm.
If it wanted to, we'd still see Mike McDaniels there because there wasn't really an issue with the run game. And the run game was one of those things that made it work really well. Achane being a great talent. But Mike McDaniel's really saying, okay, we'll throw him the ball every time we need to. And I'm okay with using his short passing skills in place of running. When they're running him up the middle over and over again, he's really not doing that well. However, whenever they're finding a way to get him into open space and pass the ball, he's doing phenomenal. That sounds simple, and that sounds like something any coach would, be able to take advantage of. However, time and time again in NFL history, we have watched players and coaches not know how to get someone into space, not understand how to, make use of this terrible offensive line in a way that actually gets someone out into the secondary for a moment. I don't see anywhere for Achane to go but down. The 5 consensus ranking is crazy for me. And honestly, with how bad I project the Dolphins to be, this is one of those picks that I need him to slide a lot before I'm putting him on my team. It's too much risk baked in that he just comes out and he is just a sandbag on your team. You have to play him every week, and every week he's scoring 11 points. It's just okay enough that you can't stop, but it's not good enough that you're actually winning games with him. You're actually losing games, and it's hurting you. And that's what Achane feels like to me. I think that he there's a chance he's like that high-end RB2 at the end of the season through sheer willpower, volume, but there's no upside there for me this year with Achane.
RB5 is crazy. I don't I've already mentioned recency bias so many times, but what are we doing if we're just taking him at his ceiling from last year? With Achane, okay, so the big knock here, besides just the complete deconstruction of the Dolphins offense, is losing Mike McDaniel And like you said, like Achane benefiting from games where even if the run game wasn't going, he was still used so heavily in the receiving game that he was, able to score you a lot of points. And that skill set is still going to be there. That's why I'm higher on him than you. I think that the complete lack of receiving options on this team, and knowing some of Malik Willis's game from Green Bay, that in duress relying on checkdowns is a benefit for Willis's game, but also it's where Achane can thrive at times. So I think that in PPR, Achane, he's not RB5 level for me at all, but I think he's a safe pick if you are able to get him later and you rely on him in PPR. In terms of the run game, Achane's skill set as a receiver is still there, but the offense will be fundamentally different with the new regime coming in. And I do like some of their upgrades on the O line, so I don't think his run game is going to fall off a cliff, but I don't see it getting better. And perhaps the biggest knock for me is the offensive coordinator they bring in is an offensive coordinator who absolutely tanked as an OC with a bad O line, and that's Bobby Slowick of the Houston Texans. Bobby Slowick's tenure with the Texans, he was did not have a great run game, but at the same time, he at least had an older Joe Mixon and not quite as a worse O line, not quite as bad as or the Dolphins O line. I think is better than the Texans, but Slowick just could not run an offense with a bad O line, and now he has another pretty mediocre one. And all that to say, I think Achane as a receiver on a bad team with limited options can really win you some weeks, and I think he could be a solid piece. But RB5 is just absurd to me. And I see his only ceiling coming from that PPR format. If you're not playing PPR, I would just stay away from Achane outside of maybe the first 3 rounds. Like it could be really rough.
I like his talent. This year I just can't. So, 2 more, and one of them I don't really want to talk about. I'm sure you don't really want to talk about this guy either, but that's not this next one. Number 14, we have Javonte Williams of the Dallas Cowboys. He's consensus ranked 19 for some reason, and you have him at 15. I've got him at 14. Javonte Williams is just this easy case of like, did we forget what happened last year? Like, I know recency bias is bad, but like that's the only year he had with Dallas.
Yeah.
He had a phenomenal year. Like, what are we doing here where we're just like, yeah, he's not going to do it again? But why? For why? He's not an old back. He's not a back who's had a billion carries. Like, this scheme works for him. It's the same people. Why are we thinking he's going to do worse? I don't get it.
The offensive regression here, I just don't see, because, we talked a lot about CeeDee Lamb versus George Pickens and them eating into each other and those individual players possibly regressing. But I don't see this offense as a whole regressing. Their O-line is still great. They have the same system. They still have Dak. And, that receiving game, probably only getting better if both Pickens and Lamb are healthy, is going to help Javonte Williams. And they did not bring in any competition. Jadon Blue could have a year or two breakout, but okay, he's a 5th-round rookie out of Texas that didn't do anything last year besides hurt his feet because he was wearing these fancy cleats. Like, where is the narrative for Javonte Williams' RB1 status to be usurped by another player? They didn't bring anybody in.
I just legitimately don't understand how he's fallen again. Like, take advantage of this in your leagues. Like, this is such a good RB2 pick if he's just chilling out there. Like, my God, what are we doing that you're like, oh, yeah, the Dallas Cowboys are just going to get someone? Why? But for why? Like, someone give me a good reason as to why Javonte Williams deserves to slide like this.
He's such a safe floor pick, and like in contrast to Achane, like he does not have that receiving upside, and there are more mouths to feed on this offense, but they're not running back mouths, and Javonte still gets it done through the ground. Like, as a pure runner, like he's one of my favorite running backs to have, especially as my RB2, because this team can just get in the end zone and he can get touchdowns, and it just he's a very safe pick. He's not the most exciting pick. He doesn't have the hype of Cam Skattebo. He doesn't have the receiving upside of Achane, in my opinion, but he's just a great RB2.
Just shocking that he fell. I don't understand it at all. Let's talk about our 15th. And we don't have to talk about him very long. So at 15th, we got Josh Jacobs with the Green Bay Packers. I think that for me, he's consensus ranked 12, so we're actually lower. Me and Willie both have him at 16. The thing with Josh Jacobs is that if the season goes off without a hitch, which he's at training camp right now, he should have a great season. I mean, realistically, like we saw last year, he was injured a lot, but otherwise,
Still solid.
still solid. But the thing is that right now, at least where we're standing right this second, I have a really hard time to believe that nothing happens during the season that's going to, disqualify him for a game or two. And even with that said, I don't, with the loss of the receiving options around him, we've been pretty positive about that. We've hoped that means that we can find some consistency in this receiving game. I actually think it makes the offense just overall worse. Like the wide receiver by committee they had going was working pretty well for them.
Yeah.
Just touchdown opportunities are going to be more limited in my opinion. And, Micah Parsons, the big part of the trade that they got last year, he's not going to be back until probably late September, mid-October. This is just a worse team than last year.
It is, and I think that RB15 is a fair ranking, but it might even be a little bit more optimistic. He finished his RB11 overall last year across 15 games, so he missed some time, and that was with I believe it was 13 rushing touchdowns. So even if he gets more opportunity for touchdowns and his offense doesn't fall off a cliff, which I think it could, I don't see him repeating quite as many touchdowns this year. And I think that his benefit is kind of a similar argument to Javonte Williams, is where he's just a solid RB2. He doesn't have any competition. This team's defense is probably not going to be as great next year because of the Parsons injury. But Green Bay seems to at least be mediocre every year. And I think that this offense has Jacobs established as the starter. And even if the touchdowns regress, he's still going to be featured a lot in games, because even if the Packers are down, Jacobs is a good runner, and he can get, he can kind of switch up the narrative of the offense. They do call a lot of run plays, so he's going to be a bell cow. But again, he's just not someone to get super excited about. I'm less worried about his potential suspension, just because nothing new has come out, and we know how the NFL seems to treat these things. He's a felony strangulation allegation, which is extremely serious, and makes me dislike him even more, because I already don't like him because he plays in the Packers. But this is something serious that the NFL should investigate and should be taken seriously. But I've become very disillusioned with having faith in that being the case for most of these cases. So regardless of the legal situation, I think Jacobs is just a safe pick, but nothing to get too caught on. And he's not a must-have kind of player. He's just if you need an RB2 and you're there in the third or fourth round, you could do worse.
So that's the top 15. I'll go ahead and read them off again. So at number 1, we got Jahmyr Gibbs from the Detroit Lions. Number 2, Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. Number 3, Ashton Jeanty of the Las Vegas Raiders. Number 4, James Cook III of the Buffalo Bills. Number 5, Jonathan Taylor of the Colts. 6, Saquon Barkley for the Eagles. 7, Omarion Hampton for the Chargers. 8, Christian McCaffrey from the 49ers. 9, Chase Brown from the Bengals. 10, Travis Achane Jr. from the Saints. 11, Cam Skattebo of the Giants. 12, Kenneth Walker III for the Chiefs. 13, Devon Achane for the Dolphins. 14, Javonte Williams for the Cowboys, and 15, Josh Jacobs for the Packers. So all you wanted to hear was the top 15. There you go. But I do want to just point out just a couple other guys, just real quick, because you're probably expecting to hear a few other names, and maybe some that you didn't. I'm going to bring up David Montgomery first off, because David Montgomery is playing for the Houston Texans. He's currently consensus rank number 26. We have him at 17, and honestly, that's from me booing him up at 15. If it were my case, he would be at 15 over Josh Jacobs, but that's not the way things go, and that's fair. So David Montgomery, he gets traded to the Texans in a pretty interesting trade deal. He kind of blew up the season last year. He said, I don't want to be here. They suck. They don't, whatever. I don't know. I'm not in the drummer. I'm just on the playing. He has this opportunity with the Texans, really beefing up their O-line, really understanding that CJ Stroud needs opportunity to throw the ball. So what we have to do is we have to support him in other ways. We have to get him protection. we have to do the rushing, and then we have to see if with these pieces he can succeed. They're going to want to rush the ball. They're going to want the running game to be successful because realistically, if you're looking at CJ Stroud as a person that you have to pay a ton of money to for a long time as the Texans, you have to see if he can succeed in a successful system.
Mm-hmm.
I said succeed a lot there, but part of that successful system is having a running game that has life. It can't be dead in the water, and it's been dead in the water. They've had Nick Chubb, they've had Woody Marks, who for a rookie was pretty good last year. But, when Joe Mixon was there, CJ Stroud looked amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Mixon's gone. It's a completely different scenario. I think they understand that. I think David Montgomery is going to get a lot more work than we expect, and I actually think he's going to be pretty successful.
I think he could really be successful, particularly with touchdowns. I think that, he's not been an RB1 on his offense the past few years, but he has been in the past, and it's to no fault of his own. He just was playing opposite Jahmyr Gibbs. I think that he's an older back, so I'm a little bit lower than 15 just because of injury potential, not having a lot of faith in the Texans' O-line. But, all that to say, the track is there for him to have like an RB1 finish, top 12, because of his volume that I think he's going to get, that we think he's going to get. And like you said, like the Texans addressed this need of having, very efficient, very reliable running back. And if you have faith in the Texans offense taking a leap, I think that Montgomery just continues with that. And even if you don't, if you have a lack of faith in CJ Stroud in this offense, I think Montgomery's volume will still make up for that. I think RB26 is curiously low for a player that's going to be one of the more involved running backs in the league, in my opinion.
I think that's a pick that's dictated by drama from last season, and I don't think you should do that. Don't do that. For picks that we were much lower on than consensus, let's start off with RB18, or in consensus RB13 is our RB18. Jeremiah Love for the Cardinals, generational rookie talent potentially. He goes to a team that is just disgustingly crowded backfield. Doesn't have a QB1 really locked down. In theory they do, but not really. And I don't know. I mean, I find the path to upside on such a bad team really harsh. So
this feels like a worse version of the Jeanty situation last year, where he's not going as high as Jeanty, but he's still a second round pick pretty clearly. And there was a press conference that came out. Can't really bank on this, but if you remember who it is, then maybe you kind of can. It was Nathaniel Hackett, the offensive coordinator, who's there with Mike LaFleur, but he's the offensive coordinator, and he's talking about the run game and how he feels, and he's talking like, oh yeah, well, James Conner, he's like looked really good, and we have a lot of faith in him, and we got a lot of good players. Doesn't highlight Love in training camp. Not saying Love's been bad, but like Nathaniel Hackett is the one in charge of orchestrating this run game. And when you already have a talented field of Love, Connor, Trey Benson, Tyler Algier, who they just paid, that's a headache. And I think that even though the Cardinals O-line is going to be better than the Raiders was last year, this competition, this Hackettness, this complete and lack of excitement for this team just really mitigates any upside that Love has. And I think that RB13 could happen, but I that just really feels like his ceiling, and there's better picks around him, I think, to make.
Yeah, it's just really a nasty situation all around. There's so many factors working against you for the Cardinals. Do you really want to be an NFC West running back and also have a team that has one of the worst offensive coordinators we've seen in recent history, and have no QB1 and a bunch of question marks for receiver? It's a lot of bad things going on. And then also you brought in Tyler Algier even. You have James Conner, you have Jeremiah Love, and they should be using all these guys. They're all good enough to use.
Yeah,
we're walking into a 3-headed running back room is one more frustrating than the 2-headed running back room.
Yeah. If this was like, even if this was like an offense where it was the Rams and they had like Kyron Williams and maybe not Blake Corum, but like Kyron Williams, James Conner, Jeremiah Love, that's more talent there. But if the Rams were using a first round pick on Love in that offense, I'd have more excitement about that, because the competition may be a little bit better, but potential for a breakout is there, and the faith in the team is there. The Cardinals spending the third overall pick on Jeremiah Love shows that they have faith and want to use him, but that doesn't give me faith that the Cardinals are actually going to be efficient in that pick and that decision.
It's funny because for me, them using the third overall pick on Jeremiah Love shows, in my opinion, that they are tanking this year for the first overall pick, because they would just watch what the Raiders did, and they're like, you have a good running back that still doesn't like pull the team up high enough to get out of the ruts, and we really need a quarterback, which they do.
Yeah,
I don't know that it's a bad decision. This division is gross. You really don't want a running back in this division on a bad team.
No, and like you said, it worked for the Raiders last year. So if they tank and they have Love next year, and Connor's gone, and Algier's just the RB2, that could be really good.
Yeah. He's someone to keep an eye on, but just not this year. I'm very out on the 13 overall this year.
Yeah.
Let's talk Derrick Henry. We have him at 19. His consensus rank is 8, so we're significantly lower than Derrick Henry. He's on the Baltimore Ravens. They've got Jesse Mintner coming in as their head coach after years and years and years of Harbaugh. We still have Lamar Jackson, and Derrick Henry is how old? Like 4,000 years old? 32 probably. That's what my guess is. That's what I'm feeling, but it could be 30. I don't know. I have very little hope that Derrick Henry continues to do what he has done in the last few years. Like, we've talked about the age cliff forever with Derrick Henry, right? So, like, maybe that's cliche, but new coach, bad vibes. If there's one team that I hate the most this year for taking anyone from, and I know I just talked about the Cardinals, but I don't really want a lot of pieces of the Ravens. I don't have a very good feel for what they're going to do, and I just feels like everyone's in a kind of vaguely bad situation for me. I have him at let's see where I have him. I have him at RB25. I'm putting him outside of the RB2 range. I think Derrick Henry is going to be just okay, barely usable. Lamar Jackson's going to pass the ball way more, and I think this is the season we see that switch over. It convinced me, because you got him at RB13. You've still got him in the top 15, so convince me why I should.
Well, so the core of my argument, as I view him in that Javonte Williams, Josh Jacobs range, where, again, the age cliff thing, it's inevitable for Derrick Henry, but we haven't seen it. And I think he's going to regress from what he was last year, perhaps. But at the same time, I think he's just a solid RB2. Like, I don't want him as my RB1 because there's other players around him that have a lot more upside. And there's players in the second round, maybe early in the second round, that I would rather have, like a receiver or Brock Bowers. So if I can get Derrick Henry as my RB2, which based on consensus, I can't. So I'm out on him for that reason. But I think that the complete lack of competition around him, and that's not disrespecting Justice Hill. I think that we know what we have with him. They didn't draft anybody. I don't believe they took someone out of Clemson in like the 6th round, but clearly, like Henry, even with a new regime, Henry is still their bell cow back. And again, he's getting older, so that could affect his performance, and that's something to consider. But I think he's going to be disappointing where he's going, but he's still going to have games where he scores a couple touchdowns. He's still going to have games where he has 15 carries. I think Henry, at this point in his career, is obviously nearing that cliff, but he's not injury prone. And I do agree. I think the Ravens are going to have some issues on offense this year, but I do have faith in Jesse Minter to at least sustain the run game that we saw under the Harbaugh administration. So I think he's a boring pick, but for me, he's just a solid RB2 in that Javonte Williams range. I don't see the cliff for him this year. Relative to where we saw him a couple years ago, sure, but not to the point where he's not going to be used, or there's going to be competition that takes that 1A1 or creates a 1A 1B situation. I still see him as the RB1.
Fair enough. Finally, let's talk Breece Hall. We've got him at 20. Consensus is at 14. You're a little bit higher on him than I am. You're at 19 and I'm at 20. What's up with Breece Hall?
Breece Hall, he's kind of one I do maybe want to put a little bit higher. He's it was really close between him and David Montgomery for me, so I kind of view them in a similar mold where there's pluses and minuses. I like the Texans overall as a team, but I like the Jets O-line more. I think their level of competition is pretty comparable. I think with Breece Hall, one thing that I do like is that he got paid, and he's still here with the Jets regime. But I think that this team with Geno or Kate Klubnik or whoever, they're going to rely on their run game perhaps a little bit less because they have a lot of new pieces. And I think Breece Hall is being drafted at his ceiling in the sense that, he could have a really good year and he's a great pass catcher, but I don't see the receiving work coming into play as much for him this year because of the new weapons. And I think he's just a solid RB2 that could really bust because the Jets have that potential, unlike the Cowboys or the Texans, to just really, really be bad this year. So he's a little bit riskier of an RB2, but I think he's a solid pick. But he doesn't, him going around RB, what is it, RB 14, and Cam Skattebo going around RB 16. Like, I know there's risk with Skattebo, but the upside for someone like Skattebo is just so much higher, in my opinion, with all these new weapons in New Jersey.
Yeah. Okay. We're not super far off. I just think that this year for the Jets is another sacrificial lamb year. And, they didn't get the number 1 overall pick last year, and they needed it because they desperately needed a quarterback. And their defense, they traded away all the good pieces. Like, this isn't a team that I think is built to run in the long term.
Yeah.
Like, that's not their bread and butter. They have to pass to stay in games. And I've seen Geno pass enough. I'm just not interested. I don't think there's a lot of touchdowns to go around here.
That's another good point. And because, Hall's game, he had some decent touchdown games last year, but Omar Cooper Jr. is a great deep threat. They're going to be playing down. They're going to be looking at Omar. They're going to be looking at Kenyon Sadiq. They're going to be looking at an ascending Adonai Mitchell. They're going to be looking at Garrett Wilson. So a lot more mouths to feed. And I guess just to wrap up this piece, I'm gonna feel so vindicated in a year when this past draft, people were saying Dante Moore returned to Oregon because he doesn't want to become a New York Jet. And I think Dante Moore returning to Oregon is awesome for Oregon. And I think it's smart in terms financially, but basically, like, people were saying, oh, he's returning to Oregon because he doesn't want to become a New York Jet. And next year, Dante Moore is going to be a New York Jet. So that's the logic that people had in the college football world is just insane.
I can understand it though, like, do you really want to be a New York Jet and then have to sit behind Geno, who's probably going to be, just bad situation. Yeah. The rest of the picks not really worth talking about here. We'll talk about like sleepers and dark horse picks a little bit later, so you'll get more of that. But that's going to be our top 15 RBs of 2026. Stay tuned. Next week we bring you the top 15 QBs and tight ends. Ooh. So hold on to your hats for that, because there's a lot. That means there's 30 players we're going to be bringing up. That's a lot of players.
If you don't have a hat, get one.
Yeah, exactly. And then hold on to it. Let it bring it down. So with that said, man, just doink out.
Doink out.